Hi, welcome back. As I get older, I recognize the pull of rituals. Rituals are comforting. You go back to them year after year. And I'm going to go back to a ritual I've had for much of the last 2 decades. At the start of every semester, when I teach my classes at the Stern School of Business at New York University, I've invited people to join me in those classes. Now, I teach only in the spring now, and the spring semester starts in late January, and I thought that this would be as good a time as any to invite you to join in those classes. Now, I describe myself as a teacher. I'm first and foremost a teacher. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a professor. I'm not an expert. So teaching is something that I truly enjoy. And I'm often asked why I enjoy teaching, and I can't capture it all in bullet points, but here are 3 reasons why. Every teacher, I think, is a repressed actor. And the great thing about teaching is you're on the stage. Not only are you on the stage, but you get to grade the audience, review the audience, rather than the other way around with an actor. I like being on the stage. Second, I know this is going to sound subversive, but I'd like to change the way people think. Think about finance, think about big questions they face in business. And I'd like to believe that in my decades of teaching, I have altered mindsets somewhere along the way. And third, I would never make a very good employee. I don't take orders well. I don't like doing things I don't enjoy doing. I'm a little lazy. And I like not having a boss. And to me, the advantage of teaching in that classroom is I don't have a boss. Or at least I have one, but that boss understands me really well because it's me. So I teach for all those reasons. As to how I teach, I've tried to capture that as best as I can because I do a session on teaching for faculty at business schools. And when I look inward and think about what it is that I do when I teach, here are 4 things that come to mind. The first is, and this may be a personal quirk, I don't like teaching classes which are a collection of topics. Nothing holds them together. To me, a class always has to tell a story, and the topics that make up the class are connected by the story. You will see this as you look at my classes, that every class that I teach starts with a big picture narrative where everything in the class is made to fit in. The second part of what my teaching involves is strengthening what I call the reasoning muscle. What is that? When faced with a question, we as human beings try to reason our way to an answer. It's a muscle like any other. If you don't use it, you will lose it. Now, it turns out that over the last decade or so, we've kind of lost control of that muscle. I call this the Google search curse, where when you have a question, rather than trying to reason your way to an answer, you often look up the answer. One of the things I hope I do in my class, I don't always succeed, is when asked a question, rather than give the answer, I try to reason my way to an answer, letting people in the class see how I reason, and sometimes where my reasoning gets stuck. Now, going with the old saying of it's better to give somebody a fishing pole than actually to give them fish, I view my job in the class is to give people the capacity to reason their way to an answer, because let's face it, the questions they're going to face in the future are questions we don't even know right now, and knowing how to reason your way to an answer is critical. Third, I know that many people think of classrooms as ivory towers, especially at business schools, and they assume that what you learn in the classroom doesn't work outside. I know, that's a legitimate concern in many classes. I hope it's not one in my classes because I try to keep my classes real. In what way? My classes are built around real companies in real time. You can't teach a valuation class without valuing the Mag 7 or without valuing an Intel or a Walgreens when it gets in trouble. And I try to keep my classes as real as I can. And finally, I have this saying, and it's going to sound odd, that I'd rather be transparently wrong than opaquely right. What do I mean by that? As a student, I remember the frustration I used to feel when a teacher would get up there and when asked a question to which there was a straight answer, they would give a convoluted answer that would cover them no matter what happened. I don't like it. I would rather give you my opinion and let you see how I got to that opinion and be transparently wrong. So when I'm wrong, you can see why I was wrong, rather than be opaquely right. So those are things that go into my teaching, and I hope they show up in my classes. So that's why I teach, and that's how I teach. Let's talk about what I teach. I started teaching 40 years ago. In fact, my very first class that I controlled was at the University of California at Berkeley, where I taught a business finance or a corporate finance class to undergraduates. 2 years prior to that, I was a TA in a class, a TA for an accounting class, and accounting is not even a subject I like. And I remember walking into the class. I took the job because I needed the money, but I remember walking into that first session, and 15 minutes in, I knew this was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Not teach accounting, but just teach. So I've been teaching ever since. In my first full 2 years of teaching, I was at the University of California at Berkeley. Amazing place to be. But I was a visiting faculty member, and like visiting faculty members all over the world, I was asked to plug in holes in the teaching schedule. Turned out that there are a lot of holes those 2 years, and I taught 6 different classes, ranging from that corporate finance class I talked about to a central banking class. And I knew nothing about central banking. I was a session ahead of my class. In a way, I'm glad I did that because it forced me to spread my knowledge widely. I might not know much, but I'm spread across a lot of different topics in finance. Now, when I came to NYU in 1986, I could have specialized, but I did not. I've stayed a generalist. I teach corporate finance, I teach valuation, I teach investing, very different topics. And for specialized people, you'd pick one of those 3 topics. And I'm glad I've kept my interests broad because to me, the great part of teaching across these different areas is I can see the same question from different perspectives. So let me list out some of the classes I teach. My core class, the one class that I ask people to take, if they can take only one finance class, is my corporate finance class. My corporate finance class I teach to the first-year MBAs. What is the class about? It's about every decision a business makes that involves the use of money. That's a very self-serving definition, right? Because every decision, somewhere along the way, money is involved. Corporate finance, to me, covers the first principles that govern how to run a business. So when you look at corporate finance, it starts by stating the end game for a business. What are we trying to do? We'll talk about that end game to begin with, and then I look at every decision a company makes and put it into 3 buckets. Investment decisions, where you decide where to invest your money, what projects, acquisitions. The financing decision, where you determine how much of that money comes from borrowed money and how much from your own equity. And the dividend decision, which determines how much you return to investors. And along the way, we ask and answer big questions in corporate finance. As I said, these classes are built around real companies, so the corporate finance class is built around a range of very different companies, from Disney all the way to a privately owned bookstore in New York City. That's a corporate finance class. And if you are going to own a business, run a business, be a consultant to a business, work in a business, pretty much anybody anywhere in business, I think, will benefit from taking a corporate finance class. Perhaps not mine, but a good corporate finance class. That's my first class. My follow-on to that is a valuation class. What do I talk about valuing? Pretty much everything. In fact, this is a class about valuing or pricing just about anything, starting with companies ranging across the life cycle, moving on to individual projects or assets. But essentially, my objective in this class is to give you the tools to put a number on just about anything, from a company all the way down to Bitcoin. So the class is built around 3 big segments in valuation. The biggest one is what I call intrinsic valuation, where the value of a business comes from what it does, its cash flows, its growth, its risk. We move on to pricing. We attach a number to an asset based on what other people are paying for similar things. And we talk a little bit about how, when you have an asset which has contingent cash flows, a pharmaceutical company with a drug that's working its way through the FDA pipeline, the contingency there is if that drug gets approved, you could be a multi-billion-dollar company. And if it doesn't, you could be worth nothing, where we bring in the option pricing models. So this is a pretty comprehensive class. I try to teach it to a diverse audience. Well, I know that the people who most will find the class most appealing are people who work in valuation, appraisers and analysts. But I try to frame the class in terms of people who will never do valuation as part of their jobs, but might benefit from understanding how to value or price anything. So you got corporate finance, you got valuation. And along the way, I developed a 3rd class, which I've never actually taught to the MBAs or undergraduates at the Stern School of Business. It's a class about investing. And it came out of a recognition early on in this process that when you look at successful investors, people who made a lot of money in the market, they're very diverse. You got the Warren Buffetts of the world, value investors, fundamental investors. You got the George Soros of the world, macro investors. You got people who make money on charts, people who make money from growth, people who make money from value. And this is a class about different investment philosophies, different ways of trying to make money. In this picture, for instance, you've seen some of the ways I've categorized investors. You can be a growth investor or a value investor, traditional breakdown. You can be a chartist or a technician. You look at charts and past prices. You can be an arbitrager. You take advantage of pricing differences in the market. You can trade on information. Or you might decide that the best thing for you to do is to accept that the market is mostly efficient most of the time and put your money in index funds. Over all of this is the nature of market timing. You have to decide, where you decide your strength comes from timing markets, deciding when they're going to go up or down. In this class, I try to be as unbiased as I can in presenting the different philosophies, what makes them work, why they often don't work, and what personal characteristics you will need to make these philosophies work. The end game for this class is not to convince you that one of these philosophies is the best one for everyone, but for you to find the investment philosophy that best fits you. Valuation, corporate finance, investment philosophies. This year, 2024, I added a new class to the mix. It's a class about corporate life cycles. What does this class look at? It looks at the fact that businesses, companies age just like human beings do. And as they age, the challenges they face in running the business change, as do the challenges that investors face in valuing these businesses or investing in these businesses. This essentially is also my latest book, but it's also a structure I've used in my corporate finance and valuation classes, and I've created a standalone class around the aging process. And also the dysfunctional things that companies do to fight aging. Those are my 4 big classes: corporate finance, valuation, investment philosophies, and corporate life cycles. Now, along the way, I discovered there are some holes that I needed to get to fill. The first is, in both corporate finance and valuation, your raw data comes from accounting statements. And much as I'd like to think that accounting classes fill that void, I've discovered that many people coming to my class still have trouble reading financial statements. So I created an accounting class. And accountants would blanch at this class because I break every accounting rule I can. It's a class for people who want to use accounting statements as raw data, which is the way I think about accounting statements. And it's a class that is essentially built around the 3 financial statements, 3 big ones: the income statement, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows, and how accounting choices on where to put an expense as a capital expense, an expense that creates benefits over many years, an operating expense, and which relates to expenses that provide revenues this year, and financial expenses like interest expenses, and how accounting inconsistencies have risen to the top as a problem across companies. So it's an accounting class. It's a short accounting class for people who want to know just enough accounting to be able to read financial statements and do financial analysis or valuation. I also discovered that there are some basic tools in finance I can't take for granted. Like what? Present value. It's amazing how much of finance is present value. So I have a session that I call my Foundations of Finance class, where I look at present value, the time value of money, the basics of risk, and how it plays out in valuing contractual cash flows, which are bonds, residual cash flows, which are equity, and contingent cash flows, which are options. Think of this as a lead into both the corporate finance and valuation class. I also talk about some macro variables, but I'm not a macroeconomist, so don't expect depth here. I again touch on inflation and interest rates and exchange rates as they show up in corporate finance decisions, valuation decisions, or even across the life cycle. And finally, we live in an age of data. And unfortunately, the discipline that we need to deal with that data, which is statistics, is a discipline that we don't pay much attention to, or we forget right after we take the class. So again, at the risk of making the purists, pretty angry about how I've structured the class, I have a statistics class, which essentially looks at statistics from a very pragmatic standpoint. Because in both corporate finance and valuation, we now live with a lot of data, and the statistics class that I've designed is really on how to deal with the data. How do you collect the data? What are the data descriptives you can use? How do you look for relationships across the data? And finally, even probabilistic tools you might be able to use in both corporate finance and valuation. So the accounting, the statistics, and the foundations of finance class are mini classes that you should take only if you feel your skills are not that good entering a regular finance class. Now I have to be very clear about how these classes are structured because I have 3 different formats. I talked about the classes I'll be teaching in the spring. These are classroom classes where the only people who can be in my classroom have to be enrolled at NYU. But here's what I will do. We meet twice a week, Monday and Wednesday, in each of these classes. The sessions are 80 minutes apiece. I will be recording those sessions and putting them online after the class is done, so it won't be in real time. So if you're interested in watching exactly what my MBAs or undergraduates watch in the classroom, you're welcome to watch those recordings and essentially get that lecture experience. Not fully, but partially. So those are my regular classroom classes, 80-minute sessions for the MBAs, 75-minute sessions for the undergraduates. They go from the late January to early May. Now I also have free online classes on all of the topics that I listed. These classes cost you nothing. The sessions are much shorter sessions, 10 to 20-minute sessions. And they come with lecture notes and post-class tests, so you can actually test yourself. But there's no personal interaction. In a sense, these are recorded asynchronous classes. Some are dated from 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But how can statistics be dated or basic finance get dated? With those free online classes, there is no certification. If you take the class, the only thing you can hopefully get out of it is the knowledge, the content. But there's nothing I can do to certify you. If you're interested in certification, NYU offers 3 of the classes as certificate classes, the Corporate Finance Evaluation and the Investment Philosophies class. They run from January to May, and you can register in these classes with the links that I will put up, that you will see on the next page. And when you register, you will be enrolled in the class. It'll happen in real time. You'll watch recorded sessions, but every 2 weeks I will have a Zoom session. We can have Q&A. And the advantage is you walk out of the class with a certificate. I don't know what you will use the certificate for, but that's up to you. There's a catch though. These are offered by NYU, and NYU is not a charitable institution. They will charge you a pound of flesh. Incidentally, I think that if you enroll before December 20th, you will get a discount of about 10%. So give it a shot if that is what you're looking for. So traditional classroom classes, long sessions, free online classes, shorter sessions, with pretty much the same content, but in a compressed format. And certificate classes, which are also online, but you get at least this certificate at the end to show you took the class. Now the links to the classes are right here. I'll obviously load these slides on and you can click on the link. But if you're interested in following along with my Spring 2025 Corporate Finance and Valuation classes, you can click the links. Incidentally, I teach my valuation class to the MBAs and the undergraduates. It's exactly the same class. Just pick one. Don't do both. That's overkill. As I said, there are online free classes in each of these areas. Those links will take you to the webcast, or there's a YouTube playlist. You can watch the playlist. The material is linked up. You can take the classes, but basically, there is no certification. Nothing you get out of the class other than hopefully knowledge. There are the certificate classes with the links. Corporate finance, I teach only in the fall, the NYU Certificate Corporate Finance. The investment philosophies, I teach only in the spring. Valuation, I teach in both the fall and the spring. I'll come back and talk about the WhatsApp discussion groups that link over there, but let me hold off on that for a moment. Now, in terms of the material for the classes, if you want books, I have books. Do I have books? But I'll have to tell you that even in my regular classes, my books are optional. They're not required because the material for the class is in the slides. The slides are self-contained. You can get away without spending money in the books. So don't feel the urge that you to buy these books because you want to send me some money, because I get very little of that money anyway. But I do have books in each of the topics, the big topics that I teach. Corporate finance, the book that actually is tied most closely to the class is my applied corporate finance book. It's in its fourth edition. It basically has the same, the material that the class covers. I have an older corporate finance book. It's almost 20 years old now. It's much longer and badly in need of an update. So unless you get it cheap or free somewhere, I wouldn't spend the money to buy the book. And I don't even think you can get it that easily because it's getting out of print. I do have a book called Strategic Risk Taking. Again, it's a book that was never designed to be a textbook. It's a book about risk and whether you should take it and what the advantages of taking risk. It approaches risk not as a bad thing, but as something that can be both good or bad. So it's a book focused on risk and how it plays out in decision making and value. So those are my corporate finance books. I have a bunch of valuation books, and I'll go down the list. There's my investment valuation book, which is my only textbook. The third edition from Wiley is out there, but the fourth edition will be coming out very shortly in the next few weeks. So if you don't have the book, hold off on buying it until the fourth edition comes out. If you have the third edition, you're perfectly okay. It contains almost much of the material that the fourth edition will include. But it's my only textbook. What does that mean? It comes with prompts at the end of each chapter, but it's incredibly boring to read. It's not meant to be read at one sitting. I also have a much more compressed version of the book, Little Book of Valuation. It's much shorter, contains the heart of the material, and it's much cheaper. So if you are budget constrained and you want a book, the Little Book of Valuation might do the trick. My third book is called The Dark Side of Valuation. It's about difficult to value companies, young companies, commodity companies, companies with intangible assets. Even banks have become difficult to value companies, and how to deal with those difficulties. Very pragmatic book in my view, because analysts facing difficult to value companies often give up. And this book is, really it makes the point. You shouldn't give up. There are ways around your problems. My very first book was called The Modern on Valuation. It's still out there. It's in its second edition. I like it, but then I'm biased. It's a book designed again for practitioners, primarily valuing private companies. The entire second half of the book is about what I call the loose ends in valuation, how to value control, liquidity, opacity, complexity. Each issue, each loose end gets its own chapter. I also have a book on connecting stories to numbers. It's a fetish of mine that valuations have become financial modeling, and that a good valuation is a combination of stories and numbers. It happens to be one of my favorite books to write that I enjoyed writing. So, if you feel pretty comfortable with valuation, Narrative and Numbers is the book you should get, because it gives you a way of connecting stories to numbers. On the investment philosophies front, I have a book called Investment Philosophies that actually very closely tracks what I talked about with the class. There's a very old book out there called Investment Management that I co-edited with the legend, Peter Bernstein. It's really a book with a collection of writings by lots of different people about the investment process from start to finish. And finally, there's a third book, which is, again, badly in need of an update, but if you can get your hands on a cheap version of it, I would get it, called Investment Fables. What does it cover? It covers all those stories we hear about how easy it is to make money in markets and what can go wrong with the stories and why they go wrong. Okay? And finally, as I said, the corporate life cycle class is built around the book that I wrote this year. It should be in bookstores around you, so you can give it a shot. You're saying, what if I don't have the money or don't want to buy a book? Not a problem. As I said, the classes are self-contained, and I've listed out the web pages for my main classes. These web pages, you'll find a link not just to the webcast, but all of the other material for the class, including the emails that I send to the students in my class. There's an email chronicle where you can read the email. So if you want to feel like you're in the class, click on those web pages, because they will take you to the material used for the class. Now, as you look at those choices, you're saying, what do I do? It depends on what your end game is. You tell me what you'd like to do, and I can probably give you a pathway to follow. The introductory classes, accounting, statistics, and foundations are really about building your toolkit. So take those classes if you feel your toolkit is in need of an update. So those classes are really not classes that are standalone to basically make you, proficient in any particular area of finance. Once you've got the toolkit nailed down, and some of you might already have that toolkit, if your end game is to run a business, an entrepreneur, a consultant, basically you're interested in the first principles of finance, running a business, then I would suggest taking just the corporate finance class. Now, that's it, you're done. Take the corporate finance class. If you're interested in valuing companies and assets, as an appraiser, an analyst, an investment manager, a hedge fund manager, then I would suggest taking corporate finance and valuation. In that sequence, I think corporate finance makes sense to take first. If you're interested in investing, just as a portfolio manager, but you don't want to actually value companies, you're more in the big picture of investing, I would still ask you to take the valuation class, because even if you don't value companies, you need to understand what drives their value and then follow up with investment philosophies. And finally, if you're interested in the corporate life cycle, which really gives you a sense of why companies do what they do, I would say take the corporate finance class first and then add the corporate life cycle class to it. Hopefully there's a pathway there that works for you. Incidentally, if you don't have time for any of these pathways and you want to do an a la carte where you take a session here and say, be my guest. And as I said, it is designed in a way that you can just sample the classes you need. A few reality checks. The first is, unless you happen to be a tuition-paying NYU student, you can't and enroll in my classes, you can't physically be in my classes. And as a teacher, there is an advantage to taking classes physically. Most of you will be taking these classes not just online, but asynchronously, not in real time. So you'll be watching a class, and the class was taught, earlier that day, if it was one of my regular classes, or 2 years ago, 4 years ago. Now, I've been teaching online for almost 20 years, well before online teaching became this fad. And I've discovered a few things about online teaching and learning. The first is, while you can sit and take in a regular class in a classroom for 75 or 80 minutes, watching that same class on a computer or on a display for 80 minutes is torturous. That's one reason when I created my online classes, I made the session shorter, because online it's much more difficult. Now, of course, some of you might be exceptions and be able to watch the 80-minute version, but for most of you, it's going to be too much. The second is, it's a well-established truth that if people who start online classes, whether it's Coursera or Udemy or any of the other classes, very high percentage never finish. In fact, the completion rates are often 5% or lower. Part of the reason is when you take a class online by yourself, you lack the discipline to finish it. You fall behind and then you give up. And I don't blame you. So while you take these online classes with the best of intentions, you might get started, but life gets in the way. My advice is don't give up. I mean, even though my regular classes run January to May, you don't have to finish by May. You can take a year to take the class. Do it in small pieces. Pace yourself so you can get it done. And finally, I'm a great believer that you learn by doing, which means if all you do is watch my classes, watch those videos, the material won't stick. If you really want the material to stick, you have to try your hand with real companies. So right after you take a class on how to estimate growth, pick a real company and try to estimate growth. I know it'll take up more of your time, and if it requires you to spread your class out over a longer period, I would do it, because you learn by doing. Now, in terms of a help desk, in my three regular classes a semester, my corporate finance and my 2 valuation classes, I'll have close to 800 students. They pay tuition and they get first dibs on my time. So they will get the bulk of my attention in terms of grading and responses to emails and questions. If you're taking one of the certificate classes, I will see you once every 2 weeks, but for an hour. Right? I have limited bandwidth and time, and I'm a pretty lazy person. So if you're taking this class online for free and you have questions, you can send those questions to me on my email, and if I get to it, I will try to answer them, but I often fall behind 100 emails, 200 emails, and then I'm digging out of a hole. So I can't make any promises, but you can try. I am going to try something this semester that I haven't tried before. I'm going to create these WhatsApp forums for each of the classes where essentially you can join in. They're basically WhatsApp groups where you can join in and you can post your question, and hopefully other people taking the class will be there and they can answer the questions for you. It's kind of a self-help desk, and I hope it works. I do know that though when you create online forums, the trolls can sometimes take over. If that happens, I will have to shut it down, but I hope it stays as a place where you can go to ask questions about valuation or corporate finance or investment philosophies. So in closing, I hope to see you in my classes, either in person if you're an NYU student who's taking my classes, or virtually. Now, and I do hope you find the content useful. Now, as you look at the content and you're saying, why does this guy teach online classes? I mean, I'm not Mother Teresa. I'm not doing this for altruistic reasons. I'm doing it for the most selfish of reasons. I'm a teacher, and as I said, I'm also a repressed actor, and it's great to have a bigger audience. If I'm going to prepare a lecture for my 250 corporate finance MBA students, I'd love to have it watched by 2,500 or 25,000 or 250,000 other people. So this is completely selfish, so don't give me too much credit. If you're taking one of the NYU certificate classes, and remember I said there is a price tag and you find the price tag daunting, please don't take it up with me because I don't set the prices. That's why I offer the free online version for those people who find the prices too high. And if you do feel the need to thank me, you don't have to buy my book, you don't have to send me money, you don't have to send me a gift. The best thing you can do for me is to pass it on. Pass it on in what way? Teach somebody around you, somebody who can benefit from what you've learned. I hope to see you in my classes, and thank you very much for listening.